and thank you for showing up today. The first thing I have to ask is Jack Hyatt on? He had indicated to me earlier he was having a little bit of a problem with his computer, so he didn't know if he was going to be able to make the invocation or not. So I will sub in for him. If y'all will, let's say a short word of prayer. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessings of today and the blessings you give us each and every day. We thank you for being able to get together a little bit, even if it's virtual, and discuss the four-way test and our service to mankind. Thank you for allowing it again, and these things we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
And can you bring up the flag, David, for us?
Yes, give me 1 second.
Gotta unfurl the flag.
Not enough wind.
That's surprising.
Hey, Paul.
David, I've got one on my wall. I can turn my camera around.
I got it.
Yay.
Okay, if you will, let's say play the allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America,
and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, and justice for all. Thank you. And now, Nancy Meek, are you with us so far? Well, Bob, I had hoped that Nancy could introduce you and your son. I guess we'll just have to pose.
There she is.
Oh, hey, Nancy, there you are. Good.
Hey,
I thought you
guys.
might want to introduce our guest this morning.
Okay, sure. I have my husband, Bob, who is a fellow Rotarian out of the Boone Club. He's a retired Army colonel who was in the 82nd Airborne stationed at Fort Bragg. Left to go to South Korea shortly before these murders. I also have my son, Rob, who is a major in the Army now reserves. He's moved just recently to active duty to reserves and is an Army JAG officer, Judge Advocate General. He is also a DOD employee who's on legal staff at the Court of Appeals of the Armed Forces in DC. So thank you all for giving them a warm welcome.
Well, we thank them for coming. We're certainly glad to have him, and thank you for those comments. And so now I will turn the meeting over to Jim Carell, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Lou. And before I do, I have a few guests myself I'd like to introduce. First of all, a former member of our club, the Honorable Superior Court Judge Greg Hayes is with us. Colonel Tim Herndon, who's retired U.S. Marine Corps. Gary Swinky, who's retired FBI. And Wayne Oram, who's retired CEO of Design Tools. And I'm not sure if the last guest is with us or not. He was trying to make it. General Chuck Swanwick, who is the retired commanding general of the 82nd Airborne. So with that, it's indeed a pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today. Jim Blackburn is a graduate of Wake Forest University and University of North Carolina Law School. His legal background includes serving as Special Deputy Attorney General in the North Carolina Attorney General's office. Jim's most notable appointment was serving as the lead prosecutor in the trial of Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald, who was accused of murdering his pregnant wife and two daughters. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison. A book and television miniseries, Fatal Vision, was based on these events. Jim also is the author of a book, Flame Out. He is a dear friend of my son in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it's indeed a pleasure and honor for us to have Jim Blackburn, who will talk about the trial of the century and the case of the century in North Carolina back in 1970. But it's been 50 years since that trial and since that case. So without further ado, it's a pleasure to introduce Mr. Jim Blackburn.
Thank you. Let me begin by telling you how topical today is for this presentation. Just last night, I got a text from an acquaintance / friend of mine in New York, who is a television producer and director, and for the last 2 or 3 years with the FX television group, has been working on a 5-part series on the MacDonald case. And I want to let you know, it hasn't really been publicized yet, but on the evening, it's a Friday evening, September the 25th, there will be a 3-part program on the MacDonald case, 1 hour each, going all the way back to the very beginning of the night of the murders, going through the military hearing a little bit, going through the grand jury a little bit, going through the time that MacDonald was free, and then eventually it will go to the trial, and then it will get into, we're talking about Fatal Vision, it will get into the relationship between Joe McGinnis, who's the author of Fatal Vision, and Jeffrey MacDonald. And then it will conclude with the hearing that took place in September of 2012 down in Wilmington. But more importantly, what I was going to do today, and Jim Corral, I will try to do this later this afternoon, is send you an email with a link. The reason that he was writing me last night, he has got an 8-part episodes of a podcast that is a companion piece to the television show. And it's on Apple Podcasts. And if you link onto it, you can see the first 2 episodes. The second episode became available only this morning and talks about the trial. In the first episode, it goes back to the night of the murders, the MPs going to the MacDonald home and walking inside. They went to the front door, and the front door was locked. It was raining, and so they went around to the back. The back door was closed, but the screen door was closed, but the main door was open. And the first person inside was a 22-year-old MP named Richard Tavere. Richard was not schooled in crime scene situations like he was going to find. He was really just an MP and doing traffic and domestic disturbances. Anyway, he goes in and he sees the scene in the master bedroom of Colette MacDonald, Jeffrey MacDonald's wife, laying on the floor with MacDonald laying next to him. He first thought it was a murder-suicide. And then he realized that MacDonald was moving. He didn't know whether anyone else was in the house or not. It was dark. And so he got his gun out, cocked it, ready to fire. He walked down the hallway, it's a very narrow hallway, and went to 2 different bedrooms where there were little girls in each bedroom. They were totally gone, but there was a lot of blood all over everywhere. And they saw on the headboard of the bed in the master bedroom, the word pig written in blood. Well, they called for medical assistance for MacDonald. He was later taken out. And alerts went out all over Fedful, for several weeks to be on the lookout for hippie intruders, because MacDonald described 4 people, 3 men and a woman, who were there that night. And so everywhere gun sales went up, and everybody was on the lookout. They couldn't find anybody, didn't arrest anyone. And finally, in April of that year, April the 26th, MacDonald was charged by the military with the murders of his family. They had a military hearing that summer that was closed to the public. Freddie Kassab, the stepfather, could not even go. And at the end of the proceeding, the presiding military man decided that the charges were not true and suggested that they redo an investigation and search for this woman named Helena Stokely. That went on for a couple of years. No one wanted to prosecute this case. And they came back with the conclusion, the reinvestigation, that MacDonald still had done it, but they couldn't get the U.S. Attorney's Office to do it. They could not get the Justice Department to do it. And finally, in 1974, Freddie Kassab, the stepfather, drove with a lawyer to Clinton, North Carolina, where he met with Judge Algernon Butler, who was the Chief District Court federal judge, and swore out a complaint for murder against his former son-in-law. And Judge Butler convened a federal grand jury, which took evidence in the fall of 1974, and early 1975, MacDonald was indicted. He was ready to go to trial that summer. And at the last moment, the defense got a stay of the trial. And there was a hearing in Richmond, Fourth Circuit. And in a 2-to-1 decision, they decided that the charges should be tossed out for failure to prosecute due to a speedy trial. Well, that went on in the courts for 4 years. And in late 1978 or early 1979, the United States Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision, I think it was 6-3, that MacDonald should be tried and the charges reinstated, which is why I wound up trying the case, because I just happened to be in the U.S. Attorney's Office when it came back for trial in 1979. That's really what the first episode goes on. The episodes are about 30 minutes each, and they're going to be 8 in all. There are 2 so far. And the second episode deals with the trial. In the first episode, you will hear the words of Jeffrey MacDonald, him speaking. You will hear Joe McGinnis talking about the case. You will hear Nancy McGinnis, Joe's wife, Joe's passed away, talking. You will hear, if you remember from the 1970s, there was a television late show talk host named Dick Cavett. Dick Cavett is still alive. And so Dick Cavett was interviewed by the people who put together this program, and he reminisces about the television show in the 70s when MacDonald came on his program. And at least I think Dick Cavett is still alive. But in any event, that was a turning point against MacDonald because he seemed to be somewhat cavalier about his appearance there. And then we get into the trial. And in the trials episodes, you hear Wade Smith talk about the evidence. You hear Nancy McGinnis talk again. You hear Joe talking, Jeff MacDonald talking again. And then you hear me. And you will hear some of the opening and closing arguments from the trial, including just a few sentences that are taken from the actual courtroom in 1979 of the hearing. And then it goes on, and it will end. It's also going to be streamed live on Hulu after it shows in September the 25th, and then 3 hours the following Friday, October the 2nd. So that's all the news I have on the status of what's going on that right now. What's going on right now in the case is nothing, because I think it's pretty much concluded. He is eligible for parole, another parole hearing, which may take place this fall. I don't know whether he'll be eligible, whether they'll release him or not. I have no idea. The general idea about release and parole is that the person who's seeking parole has to express some remorse or regret and acceptance of responsibility. MacDonald has never done that because he says he can't, because he says he didn't do it. So you're in a catch-22 situation right there. So I don't know what will happen on that. The case was 50 years old this past February the 17th. It's hard to believe that. We were all young once. And And most everyone who's involved with the trial, except MacDonald, Wade, myself, and a few others, are gone. The thing that really struck me about this case is that Jeffrey MacDonald had told this story for so many years that he was attacked by drug-crazed intruders, hippies. The thing that I would say is that he was caught because he told his story, or his alibi story, before he knew what the physical evidence would show. He did not know that every member of his family had a different blood type. He did not know that this was the beginning of trace evidence. This is before you have the shows that you have now on television. But we didn't have that then. DNA wasn't even in existence then. It was just the ABO blood grouping. And so he didn't know that. And essentially what I think happened was that night, late at night, close to midnight, MacDonald was sleeping, he said, on a living room sofa because one of his children had wet his side of the bed. And he heard a struggle and his wife and child, Kimberly, yelling to come help him while they killing him. He woke up and he was struck by a knife and a club, knocked out. And when he regained consciousness, his pajama top, it was a blue pajama top, was wrapped around his wrist. And he walks back to the bedrooms to see what has happened. He finds his wife and children dead. He takes his pajama top off and puts it on his wife to keep her warm, according to his testimony. To keep from going into shock, but she was already dead. And then he calls for help. That's his story. He's told it with some minor variations, but essentially the same story now for over 50 years. He's always claimed he did not do it, was not there, always. We did not have a real clear motive at first. We really did not. We couldn't find one. How we developed a motive was through the reenactment of the physical evidence. And what our evidence showed was that at some point a fight developed between MacDonald and his wife. We believe that because the pajama top which he was wearing, he said was torn in the living room. But there are no threads that match the tearing of a pajama top in the living room, but there are more than 70 or 80 in the master bedroom. There's lots of blood in the master bedroom, sprayed everywhere, even on the ceiling. And there's no blood in the living room at all, except a fingerprint on an Esquire magazine and a touch of blood on his eyeglasses on the floor. And that blood turned out to be type O blood, which was the same blood belonging to his youngest child, Kristen. And so the question becomes, how in the world did that get there? We believe that he struck his wife with a club, hard, probably broke both of her arms. And then when he was swinging it back, you know, like this, he hit his older daughter, Kimberly, who was sleeping nearby, who had gotten up to see what was going on, and he strikes her. We believe that because her blood type is found at the entrance to the bedroom on the floor. MacDonald is wandering around. Colette MacDonald is not yet dead. And while MacDonald is taking Kimberly back to her bedroom and tucking her in, we believe that he tucked her in because threads that matched his pajama bottoms, which he's wearing, or top, are found underneath the covering in the bedroom in the bed. He goes back and he finds Colette in Kristen's room. He picks up the club and hits his wife again. He puts her on a bed sheet, picks her up and walks out and dumps her back in the master bedroom. And as he does so, he's barefooted. And as he does so, he puts his bare feet in blood, exiting that room. And the blood is the blood of his wife, Colette, type A. The problem, you see, is there's no type A blood on the floor. None. There's blood on the floor, but it's Kristen's blood. So where did that blood type A come from? We believe it came from the bed sheet that he stepped on, that he carried Colette back into the room. Jeffrey MacDonald was convicted of second-degree murder of Colette MacDonald and Kimberly MacDonald. But he was convicted of first-degree murder of his littlest girl, Kristen, who was about 2½ years old. She was stabbed with an ice pick and a paring knife more than 35 times. Probably she was killed quickly because there are some punctures in her body in the vital organs, and perhaps the remaining cuts were designed to look like a massive cover-up. He denied that the murder weapons came from his house. He denied they owned an ice pick. He denied the club came from the house. He said the intruders must have brought it. The problem with that is we were able to conclusively prove the wood came from his house because it had been shown, it was part of the bed slat from Kimberly's room. It had been shown to have been used before in pictures that we had found. The paring knife was a general garden variety issue paring knife. The jury was out for about 4.5 to 5 hours on a 6 to 7 week trial, which is relatively fast. I believe they thought he was going to win. They were preparing to have a victory celebration on the Queen Mary in California, and they did not win. MacDonald went to jail immediately that afternoon. He was taken to, the afternoon of his conviction, I think he was taken to Butner for a few days, eventually to Atlanta, and then across country to Texas, then to California and Terminal Island. And at some point he remarries, and his wife is in Maryland, so he has moved across the country, across the United States to Maryland, where he now is still in federal prison. He's applied for parole once before, and that was denied. He's been eligible for a number of years to apply for parole, but he's only applied once. Because he said the reason he wouldn't apply because he would have to admit responsibility, and he's not going to do that. This is the longest running federal criminal case in the history of the United States legal system. It's been to the United States Supreme Court 3 or 4 times. He has always lost in the U.S. Supreme Court. He's won a couple of times in the Fourth Circuit, but lost in the Supreme Court. He was free for a year or two in 1980 through 81 or 2, when the Fourth Circuit again decided he had been denied the right to a speedy trial, and again the U.S. Supreme Court overturned that and reinstated his convictions and put him back into prison. That's where he is now. It is a fascinating case, and we believe that the motive of it was simply a domestic dispute that got way out of hand, way out of control, and that the finishing killings were done essentially as a cover-up to protect himself, to do whatever he thought was necessary to stay free. And that required that he kill his youngest child, which we believe the evidence shows that he did. The real truth is we did not have a lot of evidence, physical evidence, to really show that he killed his youngest child. We only know that whoever killed the mom and the older child likely killed the youngest child, because we don't believe there were any intruders. And the evidence is overwhelming that he killed his wife, Colette, and older daughter, Kimberly. Kimberly was 5.5 years old. Colette was 26. And I just want to end with a story that you may not have heard before. I was a very young, inexperienced lawyer at the time. And my co-counsel, Brian Murtaugh, who was with the Justice Department, also was young and inexperienced. We were not the A team. We probably weren't even the C or D team. Anyway, we were all they had. So we went to Fort Bragg, which was then an open military base, and got into the house, which was still sealed. It would be sealed for over 30 years, but at this point, it had been sealed for about 7 or 8 years. It was the fall of 1977. And when we walked in, here's what I saw. I saw Colette's shoes, a pair of Weegians, sitting by the front door. She had taken them off that night. I saw on the floor a small baby blue tennis shoe with the shoelaces still in it on the hardwood floor. In Kimberly's room, the older child, I saw on the top of a bookcase a toy cash register, red, and a Mickey Mouse watch, and a drawing that she had done in which she had even misspelled her name and written Kimberly. And in the kitchen, on a counter, there was a Valentine card. And it was written to her daddy from Kimberly. And she had signed it, "Loved, Kimmy." She was killed 3 days after Valentine's, February the 17th. That Valentine card and that shoe and that drawing, that Mickey Mouse watch that had once been on the wrist of his older daughter were all alone for over 7 years in that house. Telling that story was all I needed to know to become questioning and suspicious of MacDonald. As I read through grand jury transcripts and statements and looked at photographs. I tell that story a lot because it was the beginning of learning about the importance of passion in anything that you do. I'm a great believer that if you're passionate about what you're doing, it will make you better than you otherwise are. We had no business being in the same courtroom with some of the other lawyers, but I think it was youthful passion. And you know, when you're young, you don't know what you don't know. That was the reason we became successful. That, and quite frankly, a little fortunate luck helped us out greatly. We had a great trial judge, Frank Dupree, who's now passed away. He was a chief federal district court judge then. He was a very conservative Republican judge, appointed by President Nixon to the bench, and he broke no intolerance. He had no tolerance for mischief in his courtroom. He controlled the courtroom. That's really the difference between the OJ case and our case. Is in the OJ case, if you recall watching on television, the judge was really not in control of that situation. Judging too was not in control. Whereas in our case, the judge was very much in control. There was no play into the cameras because we didn't have cameras back then in 1970. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have cable. We didn't have any of those sorts of things. It'd be a different case to try today with cable and television and stuff. It'd be very different than DNA. That's my presentation. I hope this has been interesting. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take as long or as short a time as you want to try to answer those questions. And if not, that's okay too.
Jim, this is Bob Meek. Nancy had
Bob.
introduced me earlier. Comment. I lived, for want of a better description, 2 quadrangles down from the McDonald's. You remember how the buildings were arranged in U's. And I was there in '68. When I first heard of that and his story, it was very plausible to me because at the time I was there, we actually had male residents guarding the housing area at night because we had trouble with rapists and robberies, because that housing area is just a couple hundred yards off of 87. And as you mentioned, Bragg was an open post. So there were a lot of incidences going on that seemed plausible. About 15 years ago, Nancy and I had the occasion to hear one of the forensic guys from the FBI who did the forensic work for y'all in the apartment. And his descriptions, as you alluded to, and the stuff he was able to lay out was so detailed it changed my opinion as to what happened there. So I want to salute you for sticking with it and bringing justice to that family. Even though initially I was one of those people that were very skeptic of trying MacDonald, but I think based on listening to that forensic guy, it was very, very convincing that you had the right person.
Thank you. I understand skepticism at first. I really do. And what you described at Castle Drive, which is where it was. The problem that alluding back to, I remember saying to the jury that it didn't matter if there were 5,000 hippies standing outside the house yelling acid is groovy, kill the pigs, unless they could prove or show that at least one of those hippies was inside the house that night. And I think that's the problem. They could not show that there was anyone inside the house. And I have to be honest with you, I don't take any joy in his conviction. My life would have been different, but it would have been fine if I had never been involved in such a case. You know, I don't take any great joy in that. I think it's just very tragic that this happened because it destroyed there's a lot of collateral damage, not just the people who were killed, but there's a lot of collateral damage to other families and people, grandmothers, grandparents. He destroyed his own life essentially because he was a successful doctor. I mean, it's just crazy. Someone asked me, so thank you for your comment. Someone asked about the link to the podcast. That's what I thought I would do after we're through here, Jim. I've got your email address, I think. And what I will do is copy and paste the link, you know, in a subject line of the email, and I'll send it to you, and then perhaps you can share it with everyone else who is here today, if you want to do that. But I will say this to you, if for some reason I get stricken down before I can do that, let me just know to you that the name of the podcast is Morally Indefensible. Morally Indefensible. So if you will go to your podcast app, if you have one, and type in or search for the phrase morally indefensible, it will come up. That's the title. The title of the FX series is called something about wilderness. I can't remember what it is, but it's not that. It's another title for the FX series. But the podcast is titled Morally Indefensible. Thank you. Does anybody else have a question?
Can you hear me, Jim?
I think so.
Where is MacDonald located now or detained?
He's in federal prison in Maryland. I can't remember the name of the federal place. He's been there for over 10 years. He's been married for over 10 years to this lady who met him, I think, when he was free for a while. She didn't meet him in prison. I've met her. She was, you know, she said, it's tough being in that situation. You have to be a different kind of unique person to do that, because she married him after he had been convicted, you know, and she married him when he was in prison. They get married in prison. It takes a unique person to live that kind of life, I think.
Yeah.
But that's what she's chosen to do with her life. I think it's a tough way to live your life, I think. It says that one of the saddest things it's such a way that this happened. You know, it's just very sad. But I will send you that link. And please understand, if some of you all do not agree with the government's position that he's guilty, that's okay. It doesn't offend me that some people disagree with me on that. I understand that. People can differ.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. I can't hear you.
She just got muted.
Hi, I'm Julie. Thank you for your presentation. That was excellent. I remember being fascinated with the case when I was back in college. And I have a couple of questions. A couple of things. I recall initially MacDonald's father-in-law, if I not remember, was supportive of his
He was very supportive of his.
And I can't remember what made him turn. What was it that made him turn? That's my first question.
Okay.
I do also recall that he had some wounds, but they seemed to be self-inflicted. He was a surgeon, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And then lastly, if we had the forensics that we have now back then, would the trial have gone differently?
Would the what gone differently? Yes. Yes. Because I think if we had been, if we had the science that we have now, then I think that we would have known more than just the ABO blood types. We would have known DNA would have erased a lot of the questions that we had. We didn't have that then. So I think absolutely, a wilderness of error. Jeff Klein just wrote, it is a wilderness of error. I tell you, the term wilderness of error comes from a book that was written about MacDonald. It was pro-MacDonald back around 2012, but the television thing, I think, takes a different point of view, but used the same title. Going back to what caused Freddie Kassab to change, I think there were 2 or 3 things. First of all, Freddie, everybody should want to have a father like Freddie if something bad happens to you. Freddie was just totally obsessed with finding the people who killed his step-grandchildren, and his stepchild. First of all, he did not see the transcript of the military hearing until after it was over. He kept asking Jeff MacDonald for the copies, and MacDonald kept saying he couldn't get them. When he did finally get them, he went through them line by line, night after night after night, and became convinced that it was inconsistent with what MacDonald said. One of the humorous things is MacDonald says he always washed dishes. He was washing dishes that night, and Freddie said he never washed a dish in his life. And then that was sort of humorous. And then, you know, I don't know how your houses are, but I've looked at some of y'all. Look at where you are right now in your homes. Look at the pictures behind your right shoulder on the wall, and realize that if a life and death struggle happened in your house right now, they would move. Something would be, a lamp would be tossed over, a picture would be knocked over. Your house would be in disarray. The MacDonald house was almost perfectly still. I mean, in a china cupboard, it's in the dining room. It's a small L-shaped living dining room. The dishes are still upright. The lamps are still there. Then the coffee table was turned over, but that was pretty much it. It's a heavy coffee table. We think it was just sort of, you know, done like that. Because every time I tried to turn it over, I must have turned it over 100 times. It was top heavy of the wood, and it would always flip all the way over as opposed to sideways. The second thing that convinced him to change was he watched the Dick Cavett show, and he just enraged him. Rather than MacDonald being sad and about the murders, he was somewhat playing to the audience and smiling and giggling, and that just enraged him, you know. And then finally, he caught MacDonald in a really big lie. MacDonald called their home one night and told them he had found one of the intruders, the woman, and had killed her. I think in South Carolina. Her name was Willie the Witch, is what he said. So today, you know, you could online, you could check things out a lot quicker. But what Freddie did was he went to all the checked all the newspapers for obituaries and death notices, all the funeral homes. He found no evidence of anyone like that who had been killed. And finally, MacDonald admitted that it was a lie, trying to throw them off. And so they started taping his conversations, and MacDonald made a lot of mistakes. One of his mistakes is he didn't stay close to the family. He went to California, tried to start a life over. Meanwhile, leaving the grief-stricken family alone on the East Coast with nothing but time on their hand to check this out. Freddie, he wrote every member of the United States Congress. He wrote every member of the United States Supreme Court. He got absolutely nowhere until he filed this complaint. I will tell you an interesting side story is that the television series Matlock with Andy Griffith came about as a result of the MacDonald television movie Fatal Mission. Andy Griffith plays a major part in the television movie. And so that's the little side note. Someone asked about a drug. I don't remember the drug that MacDonald was using that night. I will tell you, during the course of the trial, we were trying to find high and low, any evidence of major drug uses by MacDonald. We were trying to figure out anything, and we couldn't find any stuff. The reason the military investigation failed is they tried it different. There are two reasons. One is that the presiding judge did not control the courtroom. Bernie Siegel, who was MacDonald's lawyer, sort of ran the show. Secondly, there were 10 or 11 MPs there that night. They called them all. We called 2. There was more chaos in that hearing. But most importantly, they didn't have the scientific evidence that we had, because what happened was after it was dismissed and it went over to the feds, it becomes a federal as opposed to a state crime because it happened on a federal military base. But they went to the FBI lab, and it was the FBI lab that really did most of the sophisticated scientific analysis that we were able to use the trial, and that made our case just a lot stronger. We also had the federal grand jury testimony, which they did not have. We had every witness. We knew what they were all going to say. MacDonald testified, and he was a disaster as a witness in front of the federal grand jury. And so I think for that reason, we had a stronger chance of winning. Still, even with all that, I have to tell you, if you read the newspapers back during that time, you would have thought we would lose. And part of that is because the press would come in late to the court. The court would say, let's say, start at 9. They get there, but at 9:30 to 10. They had deadlines to meet to get their papers, and they'd leave about 3 or 4. So they would miss 2 or 3 hours of every day's testimony. And I think that hurt their reporting of the case. Any other questions that anybody has? I will, though, I will tell you, I talked to Mark, the producer and director's name is Mark Smerling, Smerling. I spoke with him this morning and said, that's just really pretty good. You will note when you start to listen to the first one, it's the first episode, I thought, for the most part, is chilling. I wouldn't say it's scary. I would just say it's chilling. It's the best words to have. Richard DeVere, who was the first MP, he's still alive. Richard's in New York. About 10 days ago, he calls me on the phone to check in. I've not talked to him but 2 or 3 times in the last 30 years. And he said, Jim, I was 22 years old when I did that. I didn't know nothing. I didn't know anything. But he was very careful. He was the best first person witness we had. They did not ever trip him up at all. He's very good. Thank you all for that, though. If any other questions, I'd be happy to answer. Or if you want to send me an email, Jim's got my email address. Or my email address is jim@jimblackburnseminars.com. 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 The case influenced my career is it's just never died. I've gone years without it being much of anything to me, but it just always comes up. Like when the 50th anniversary came up, Channel 5, the local TV station, calls, won't know if I'm still alive, and can they come over and interview me? That sort of thing. It always comes up like that. Wade Smith and I have talked about it for years. We always agree to disagree, and that's okay.
Well, Jim, this is Lou Wetmore. Thank you so much for that fine presentation. We really appreciate it. And thank you for telling us about the podcast and the stream.
Yeah.
That I'm sure most of us will be interested in that.
Yeah, do, because I will be honest with you, the second episode is about the trial.
Mm-hmm.
And it just became public this morning. So it's timely. So I will send Jim, in the next little bit, the link to that, and he can forward that on to all of you all.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for setting this up. And Nancy, thank you for having your husband and son as guests. We appreciate that. I should tell you that next week, we will not have a meeting because we're having the wine tasting on the Friday of next week. So there will be no meeting next Tuesday. The Tuesday after that, September the 1st, John Hood's going to handle the program, and the subject is North Carolina history and public monuments. And the invocation will be from Coy Hudson. So with that, unless there's something else that needs to be said at this meeting. Yeah.
Could I make a quick announcement?
Certainly.
Yeah. It's about the soup kitchen. We've had Rotary representation on the first and third Mondays of each month. Sometimes we've had plenty of people helping. Some Mondays is a bit thin on the ground. This Monday we could have done with 2 or 3 extra people. We served 222 meals in 30 minutes, and these are boxed meals that we box up. And so you stand in line and you ladle food into boxes and you pass them down the line. So it's not real hard work. We all wear masks. So if there's any Rotarians who'd like to help on the first and third, give me a call, send me an email, and I can fill you in on a bit more information. Basically, get there about 11:15. You finish by 12:30. That's it.
Okay, thank you, John. We appreciate that. Now, one thing I think you were kind of garbled when you said, who should they contact if they want to tell you they're coming?
Well, you could tell me, and I'll make sure you know the details of where you've got to be and when. But otherwise, you just basically turn up.
Just show up. Okay, that's great. Thanks. Okay, if all of you will, please join me in the 4-way test. Is it the truth?
Truth.
Is it fair to all concerned? Will it bring goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank all of you for joining us, and we'll look forward to the wine tasting and then getting together on September the 1st. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks. I'll leave you all now. Jim, I will send a link to you shortly. Thanks.